Hello everyone, military planners in Moscow had spent 3 years constructing what they called the most fortified defensive line in modern European history. Thousands of kilometers of trenches, minefields layered 6 rows deep, dragon's teeth concrete barriers, and pre-positioned artillery designed to grind any assault into dust. Western analysts called it impenetrable. Russian state television called it the shield of the motherland. However, on the night of March 14, 2026, a Ukrainian mechanized brigade punched a 10-kilometer gap through the Toretsk corridor in Donetsk Oblast, and within 72 hours, Russian commanders were issuing emergency orders to units as far as 140 kilometers away. The most fortified line in Europe had not stopped the assault. It had become the trap that was holding Russia's own army inside. The images you are about to see on your screens document something that battlefield analysts at the Institute for the Study of War are calling a structural collapse rather than a tactical defeat. What you will witness is not a single breakthrough. It is the unraveling of a defensive architecture that Russia spent billions of rubles and hundreds of thousands of lives constructing, now turning against the very force it was supposed to protect. But that is not the most shocking detail. There are 2 factors that transformed a 10-kilometer breach into a catastrophic operational paralysis, and we will explain both in the sections ahead. First, we must go back to the frozen fields of Donetsk Oblast and the moment the wall began to crack. The date was March 12, 2026. For 3 days prior, Ukrainian artillery had conducted what Defense Ministry briefings in Kyiv described as a deliberate suppression campaign targeting Russian electronic warfare nodes along a 40-kilometer stretch north of Toretsk. According to preliminary assessments published by the Institute for the Study of War on March 16, Ukrainian forces identified and systematically destroyed 11 of the 14 Russian electronic warfare stations covering that corridor. These stations were not ordinary jamming equipment. They were the nervous system of Russia's drone defense, the invisible wall that had been neutralizing Ukrainian FPV drone attacks for months. With 11 of 14 nodes eliminated, a 40-kilometer corridor opened in Russian electromagnetic coverage. Ukrainian Special Forces intelligence units had been mapping this gap for 6 weeks. On the night of March 14th, they moved through it. The initial assault force comprised elements of the 47th Separate Mechanized Brigade, equipped with a combination of American-supplied Bradley IFVs fitted with reactive armor packages, alongside domestically modified Ukrainian Leopard 2A6 tanks carrying the thermal masking systems first used during the Zaporizhzhia operations of late 2025. According to German intelligence assessments cited by Der Spiegel on March 17, the assault column advanced 7 kilometers in the first 4 hours under near-total electronic silence. Russian forward positions in the Toretsk sector reported contact but were unable to coordinate responses because the very electronic warfare systems designed to protect them had been destroyed in the preceding suppression campaign. By 0400 on March 15th, Ukrainian forces had established a 10-kilometer penetration line and were holding it against 3 Russian counterattack attempts. This is where things become extraordinary, because the 10-kilometer breach was not the objective. It was the key. Now here is the detail that changes everything about how you understand what happened next. Russian defensive doctrine for this generation of fortification is built around what military planners call layered interdependence. Each defensive belt is designed to channel attacking forces into pre-sighted kill zones covered by artillery and air defense from adjacent belts. The system works brilliantly when all belts remain intact. When a single belt is penetrated deeply enough to place Ukrainian artillery within range of the logistics nodes connecting the 2nd and 3rd defensive belts, the entire system does not simply weaken. According to a CSIS assessment published in Washington on March 19th, it begins to invert. The forces in the 2nd and 3rd belts find themselves unable to resupply, unable to reinforce, and unable to retreat without crossing ground now covered by Ukrainian fires. Russia had built a fortress. Ukrainian forces had found the door, walked through it, and locked it from the inside. Within 48 hours of the initial breach, open-source intelligence analysts tracking Russian military logistics reported a dramatic change in supply convoy patterns across 3 separate oblasts. Radio Free Europe correspondents monitoring telegram channels associated with Russian units in the Donetsk sector documented what one Russian soldier described as complete radio silence from rear command. Supply convoys that had been running on predictable 12-hour intervals stopped entirely along the M20 highway artery connecting Russian forward depots to the Toretsk sector. Ukrainian long-range strike assets, including domestically produced Palyannitsia cruise missiles and repurposed Neptune anti-ship missiles adapted for land attack, struck 4 major ammunition transfer points within the first 72 hours of the breach. According to Ukrainian Defense Ministry statements confirmed by satellite imagery analyzed by the Conflict Intelligence Team on March 18, over 40,000 artillery shells, 12 Buck M3 surface-to-air missile reload canisters, and an estimated $30 million in armored vehicle spare parts were destroyed in those 4 strikes alone. The Russian army east of the breach was not under immediate assault. It was being starved. The strategic implications of what unfolded in those 72 hours extend far beyond the 10 kilometers of Donetsk ground where the breach began. Let us examine what the maps actually show. The Toretsk corridor sits at the geographic intersection of 3 Russian-held supply routes that feed the entire northern Donetsk front. Russian military planners had designated this intersection as a Category 1 logistics node, the designation reserved for infrastructure whose loss would require the redeployment of forces from adjacent sectors to compensate. According to ISW analysts cited in their March 19 daily update, Russian forces responding to the Toretsk breach were compelled to withdraw elements from both the Kreminna sector in the north and the Velika Novosilka sector in the south to stabilize the Toretsk line. This is the operational trap closing. In trying to plug a 10-kilometer hole, Russia was creating 2 new vulnerabilities stretching across a front line that now spans nearly 200 kilometers of contested territory. Ukrainian command was not simply exploiting a breach. It was conducting what military theorists call a fixing operation at operational scale, holding Russian reserves in place against one threat while creating conditions for exploitation elsewhere. But that is not the most shocking detail. The truly critical element of the Toretsk breakthrough is not what happened on the ground. It is what happened in the air and what it reveals about the structural transformation of Ukrainian warfare that has been quietly assembling since mid-2025. We will return to this after we examine the geopolitical dimension that makes the timing of this operation not coincidental but deliberate. The Toretsk breach did not occur in isolation. It occurred in the 3rd week of March 2026, at a moment when diplomatic conditions had aligned in a manner Russian strategic planners had spent 3 years trying to prevent. The European Union's decision on March 11th to activate the 3rd tranche of the European Peace Facility, releasing an additional 6 billion euros in military assistance specifically designated for long-range strike and air defense systems, had been publicly announced 48 hours before Ukrainian forces began their electronic suppression campaign in Donetsk. Coincidence is a word that intelligence analysts use carefully. According to Politico's Brussels bureau reporting on March 13th, senior Ukrainian officials had privately communicated to European counterparts that a significant operational action was imminent. The Europeans released the funding. The Ukrainians moved. This is coordinated alliance warfare, and it represents something that Moscow has been unable to replicate with its own partners. Consider the contrast that has emerged in the first quarter of 2026. While Ukraine operates within an alliance structure that now includes coordinated funding releases timed to operational windows, Russian military planners have been navigating a quiet but significant deterioration in their primary partnership. Trade volume between Russia and China fell to $228 billion in 2025, a decline of approximately 7% from the previous year, according to Chinese customs data published in February 2026. More significantly, Chinese exports of dual-use electronics to Russia, the integrated circuits and precision components that Russian artillery shells, drones, and electronic warfare systems depend on, declined by an estimated 18% in the second half of 2025, according to analysis by the Kyiv School of Economics. Russia is not isolated the way the Soviet Union was isolated, but it is discovering that partnership with China is transactional in a way that NATO partnership with Ukraine is not. When Ukraine needed funding for an operation, allies moved. When Russia needed components, it paid market rates and received declining volumes. This asymmetry is now writing itself into the battlefield. The human dimension of what is unfolding in the Toretsk sector deserves a moment of honest accounting, because behind the operational maps and logistics statistics there are human beings caught in the machinery of this war in ways that the Kremlin's nightly news programs will never show. Video footage geolocated by open-source analysts to coordinates north of Toretsk in the 48 hours following the breach shows Russian soldiers, young men, many appearing to be the recent conscript cohort inducted under Russia's emergency mobilization orders of late 2025, moving on foot through terrain their vehicles could no longer traverse because the roads were under Ukrainian artillery observation. The expression visible on one soldier's face captured in drone footage published by Ukrainian military intelligence on March 16 is not the face of a man fighting for victory. It is the face of someone who has understood that the system he trusted to supply him, to support him, to extract him if necessary, has broken down completely in this sector. Military analysts at CSIS have noted that Russian prisoner of war testimonies collected in the Toretsk sector in the days following the breach consistently describe receiving no resupply for periods ranging from 4 to 9 days before capture. These are not isolated failures of logistics. This is what operational paralysis looks like at the human level. Vladimir Putin's strategic calculus for 2026 was built on two assumptions that the Toretsk breach is now stress testing simultaneously. The first assumption was that the fortified defensive line could absorb Ukrainian offensive capacity indefinitely, while Western political fatigue eroded the alliance supporting Kiev. The second assumption was that Russia's numerical advantage in manpower, currently estimated by Western defense officials at approximately 3-1 in theater, would eventually overpower Ukrainian technological sophistication. The Toretsk operation has challenged both assumptions in the same 72-hour window. The fortified line did not absorb the assault. It amplified its consequences, and the manpower advantage means nothing in sectors where the men cannot be supplied, cannot communicate effectively, and cannot maneuver without entering ground covered by precision fires. Putin set out to wear Ukraine down with mass. Ukraine has found a way to make mass into a liability. Now we arrive at the element we deferred earlier, the aerial dimension that transforms this breakthrough from tactically significant to potentially strategically decisive. The 10-kilometer breach worked in part because of something Ukrainian forces have been developing quietly since mid-2025 and deployed at scale for the first time during the Toretsk operation, coordinated autonomous drone swarms operating under what Ukrainian defense technology officials, speaking to Defense News on March 20th, described as distributed mesh intelligence. Individual FPV drones connected by fiber optic tethers to avoid electronic countermeasures had been present in this conflict for over a year. What appeared at Toretsk was different. Ukrainian forces deployed what open-source analysts have identified as groups of 12 to 20 drones operating in coordinated attack packages, sharing targeting data through a low-power encrypted mesh network that Russian electronic warfare systems were not calibrated to detect or jam. According to preliminary battle damage assessments cited by the Institute for the Study of War, these coordinated packages achieved a 63% first-strike kill rate against Russian armored vehicles attempting to counterattack the breach in the first 24 hours, compared to a historical average of approximately 22% for single-drone FPV operations. Russia's electronic warfare advantage, the capability that had neutralized Ukrainian drone operations repeatedly over the previous 18 months, had been outpaced, not defeated permanently. Outpaced for now, but in warfare, temporary technical advantage at the right moment and the right place is often enough. The coming weeks will determine whether the Toretsk breach becomes a footnote or a turning point. Several conditions will govern which path this opening chooses. Ukrainian forces currently hold the 10-kilometer penetration line, but are sustaining pressure from Russian forces that have now consolidated approximately 30,000 additional troops from adjacent sectors into the Toretsk counterattack force, according to American defense intelligence officials cited by Reuters on March 21st. The question is not whether Russia can mass forces against the breach. Russia can always mass forces. The question is whether those massed forces can be sustained logistically in a sector where Ukrainian long-range fires have made every supply route dangerous. If Ukraine can maintain interdiction of Russian logistics in the Toretsk sector for an additional 2 to 3 weeks, the window opens for a second operational action, potentially in the Crimea sector in the north, where Russian forces have already been thinned to reinforce Toretsk. Only time will tell whether Ukrainian command has the reserves and the will to exploit what they have created. But the architecture of the situation is more favorable to Kyiv than any operational moment since the Kharkiv counteroffensive of 2022. There is a broader pattern here that extends beyond any single breakthrough. The Toretsk operation represents the maturation of something that analysts have been watching assemble across multiple domains for 18 months, the convergence of Western-supplied long-range precision fires, domestically developed Ukrainian drone technology, coordinated alliance funding mechanisms, and an intelligence architecture that can identify and exploit gaps in Russian defensive systems faster than those gaps can be repaired. This is not a single weapon or a single tactic. It is a system, and systems are far harder to counter than individual capabilities. Russia can develop countermeasures to the mesh-networked drone swarms eventually, but while it does, Ukraine will be developing the next generation. Russia had calculated it could outlast Ukrainian innovation. The frozen ground of Toretsk suggests the calculation may have been wrong from the beginning. Share your thoughts on this development in the comments section below. Do you believe the Toretsk breach represents a genuine operational turning point, or will Russian forces successfully consolidate against the penetration? The discussion in the comments is always remarkable, and your perspective matters. Do not forget to subscribe to our channel and like this video if this analysis has given you a deeper understanding of what is actually happening on the ground in Ukraine. Russia built its wall to stop Ukraine. Ukraine walked through it and handed Russia the lock. Winter may be ending in Donetsk, but for the Russian army holding the line east of Toretsk, the cold has only just arrived. Thanks for watching us.